Everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Police and Crime panel. We'll just start this afternoon with a round of introductions so everybody is clear who is in attendance. My name is Claire George. I'm independent member of the panel and chair.
Philippa Rose, Senior Democratic Service Officer.
Cameron Holloway, representative for Cambridge City.
I'm Councillor Anna Bradnam, and I'm one of the representatives from Cambridgeshire County Council.
Hello, I'm Councillor Helen Leaning. I'm representing South Cambridgeshire District Council.
We'll have to share. Good afternoon, panel. Darrell Preston, Police and Crime Commissioner for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough.
Catherine Kimberley, Head of Engagement and Communications, working for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Susan Woolwork for Fenland.
Christine Whelan, representative of East Cambs District Council.
Alan Sharp, representing East Cambs District Council.
Councillor Jason McNally, representing Dogsthorpe and Welland Ward in Peterborough.
Councillor Neil Boyce, Peterborough City Council.
I'm Neil MacArthur, the Director of Legal and Governance and Monitoring Officer at Peterborough City Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Item number 1, apologies for absence. Pippa, do we have any apologies for today?
One apology for absence was received from Councillor Julie.
Thank you, Pippa. Declarations of interest. Does anybody have any interests that they need to declare prior to the meeting? No, thank you very much. Minutes of the previous meeting, these have been circulated. Do I have panel's consent to sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of February 2025? Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry, I'm not listed on the minutes. I have spoken to Pippa.
We'll make that amendment. Thank you, sir. No other. Thank you. Right, item 4, update on actions and recommendations from the previous meeting. The next item on the agenda is an update on the actions and recommendations raised at the previous meeting from the Commissioner. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Item 4 is public questions. Sorry.
Okay. So do you want to wait for the updates or do the updates next? No. And then come back. Okay? Okay. Okay. Right, we'll move. Thank you, Councillor Bradnam. We'll move then to what's been published as item 4, which is public questions. We have a public question. Mr. Lachlan, would you like to come forward and ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. My name's Guy Lachlan. I'm a resident of the county and I was a candidate in last year's general election for reform for St Neots and Mee, Cambridgeshire, and I'll be standing as an independent in forthcoming council elections. My question stems from really talking to people in the constituency. In order to secure and maintain public confidence in policing, the police should be seen to be acting with fairness and impartiality at all times, and should be seen to be acting in a manner that complies with the law. I understand that the constabulary has recently failed to comply with the Home Office crime recording rules in respect of a number of offences in which it could be inferred that the apparent suspects were public authority employees. Could the Police and Crime Commissioner please confirm for me that he expects the constabulary to comply with the Home Office crime recording rules, and advise what steps he will be taking to ensure that the constabulary rectifies the specific failures in its crime recording processes that have been brought to its attention since December last year?
Thank you for your question. Commissioner, would you like to respond, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lachlan, for your question. My office received correspondence from Mr Luckman in December 2024 in relation to similar points, and my office responded. I hold the Chief Constable to account for the exercise of all of his functions. I expect the Constabulary to correctly record crimes in compliance with the National Crime Recording Standards. This is essential to providing a good service to victims and keeping the public safe. Unrecorded crimes may not be investigated, and this in turn prevents offenders from being brought to justice. Now, I have a range of governance, compliance and assurance mechanisms in place to ensure I meet my statutory responsibilities, which includes holding my Chief Constable to account. Now, in relation to the specific points raised by Mr Lepland, HMIC FRS, the Inspectorate, through their PIL assessments and their crime data integrity programme, provide me with assurance that the Constabulary are compliant and continue to meet these important standards. The progress of recommendations made by HMIC FRS are monitored by my office through the Constabulary's business assurance meetings, which are published. This is chaired by the Deputy Chief Constable. The Chief Constable provides further assurance on progress at my Business Coordination Board. My apologies, that is published, the other one is not. If there are specific issues with the Constabulary not recording crimes, then this should be brought to the attention of the Constabulary. They are the appropriate authority for initial handling of dissatisfaction.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr Loughlin, you may have one supplementary question should you choose, but it must arise directly out of the response that you've been given.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks for the answer, I appreciate it. Just for some specifics, sections 20 and 21 of the Criminal Justice and Courts Act of 2015 make it an offence for a care worker or care provider to intentionally engage in ill treatment and wilful neglect in health and social care settings. Cambridge Constabulary currently refuses to record these as offences, contrary to Home Office crime recording rules, and has specifically stated that victims cannot report these offences to the police. Supporting victims and witnesses is one of the key priorities in the Commissioner's new police and crime plan. All I'm asking is that this plan should apply to all, even those who are difficult or even unpleasant in the population. I'd like to ask the Commissioner please to undertake to look into this specific matter and perhaps reply to my question in a written format later on. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioner.
Chair, very happy to do so. If underlying this is that vulnerable people in our community are at risk, then that's something I would take very, very seriously, and is indeed part of my police and crime plan. Mr Luckman, I'm very happy to take this away and come back to you with a written response.
I think just before you go, as a social worker myself in a different authority, I think that there are adult safeguarding teams that could be involved in that as well.
There are. Yeah, I think this is quite a wide-ranging issue.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. Okay, now we're going then to item number 5, the review of actions and recommendations from the previous minutes. Commissioner, do you have any updates you wish to share with us?
Thank you, Chair. There were no formal actions. Councillor Leeming did ask a specific question at the end of the panel regarding domestic abuse services. I'm informed that Nikki, my commissioning lead, has provided a comprehensive update. Other than that, there's no other items, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so we move then actually onto the formal agenda items. Item number 1, the Cambridge and Peterborough Office of the Police and Crime Commission, the delivery plan. Commissioner, I know you've brought some of your team with you this afternoon, but I'm imagining you'd like to certainly introduce the item.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, and if there are any further questions that my team can help with, I'll bring them in at the appropriate stage. The papers were circulated in good time, and hopefully the panel's had a chance to read the paper that covers this agenda item, the delivery plan. I'm pleased to share this, my first delivery plan with the new plan update, which reports on progress against all 5 pillars of the new police and crime plan. I hope you also welcome the easy to read style, something that we have always done within my tenure, both with plans and other papers as well. It's also got links directing you to further information should you wish to see that. And this was developed after reflecting on feedback from panel members over the past few years. It's also great for me to see that the new brand has been brought to life. The panel will recall that was Anglia Ruskin University students that helped us with that. It contains a huge volume of information across the breadth of our work, and I don't want to spend too much time here repeating what you've already heard, especially as the last paper was a deep dive, or the next paper is a deep dive into the Safer Communities pillar, which we'll be talking about in the next agenda item. However, there are just a couple of things that I would like to reflect on. Firstly, early intervention and prevention, particularly preventing and reducing serious violence. The panel will be aware that this is now a national priority, has been for some time with various government strategies. Of course, it's also a local strategy. From my perspective, keeping young people particularly out of the criminal justice system and keeping young people particularly away from serious violence, gangs and knife crime is a must and a top priority in my view. There are a number of things that my office have led on, that policing and the partnership have led on, and I continue to chair the county-wide High Harms Board, which oversees the work across partners and indeed third sector across our county of both Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. It's fair to say as well that the High Harms Board, and particularly those links with the community safety partnerships, have been highlighted as good practice in a recent national case study on partnership working. Also like to mention Safer Streets 5. This is the 18-month project. It comes to an end soon. I don't think we'll see a repeat of this sort of funding, although there are other available streams hopefully that we'll be bidding into. Just want to highlight a couple of pieces of work. One of them was the Business Against Abuse work in Cambridge, which I'm very keen that the Business Against Abuse across the county continues. It started off with training of nighttime economy staff. We moved it on to buses across the county as well. And it's really quite innovative, and actually it works. We've had already some case studies, some information from Stagecoach where their drivers have actually used this training and hopefully prevented some really serious and nasty incidents from occurring. So another area is enabling. Another area is tackling crime and antisocial behaviour. Also road safety. My team, and I think we were asked this specifically, my team continue to support the work of Vision Zero Partnership, and this includes investing in resources, including a casualty reduction officer and the speed watch coordinator, and working very closely with the Combined Authority. We also have dedicated vehicles for our special constabulary, and that's more around enforcement, but most importantly as well, the work that we do with the community safety partnerships, and we've talked about the community safety partnerships, the investment in all of our local community safety partnerships. This also includes road safety. Historically, I think that had been left out, and we've now seen some local projects helping to move this forward as well. And maybe just a couple of other areas. Business crime and retail crime. I've been asked about this, shoplifting and the abhorrent crimes that happen in our high streets on a daily basis. I have received a very comprehensive report from the constabulary on what they are doing around this. They have certain operations ongoing and have made several arrests. However, it is another one of those crime types that the police will never arrest their way out of, which comes back to, in my view, the prevention piece as well, probably being most important. So, Chair, I think I'll leave it at that. Very happy to take any questions on the paper.
Thank you very much. Any questions from panel members? Thank you. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions, if you'll indulge. The first one is on page 9, Safe Communities. Very pleased to see that the more visible policing hours. You've done up to 7,000 additional patrol hours in 20 hotspots. Subject to funding, are we able to now look at other areas, other hotspots?
So currently there is a bid into the Home Office. I can't give any detail to that because it hasn't been accepted by the Home Office. When it is, I'll make that available. I don't have the information that I can share at the moment.
On page 9 as well, answering your calls, call waiting times. I'm very pleased to see that we're below the national average, but also could we actually know what the national average is for those? And then it also reports in January 2025, 117 hoax and inappropriate calls were made. Would you know if the constabulary actually investigate those to see if there's a common denominator, such as a disgruntled resident making lots of telephone calls, or is it just like various?
In relation to the first question, I was given this the other day, but it's gone, so I'll get back to you on what the national average is. It's interesting. I just on this point around response times, both answering the telephone and responding to calls. I think it is important, and I'm pleased that the constabulary have made significant progress both in 101 and responding. But equally, and the Chief Constable will say this, and I do agree with them on this, it's actually what the police do when they turn up and when they answer that phone. And I'm very keen to hold the police to account for the very best possible service, which I'm sure we would all agree with. In relation to the second part of the question, the answer is yes, I know that the police do. I will ask the question more specifically about what they are doing with the hoax call. Many of them are just silent 999 calls, and there is no pattern. When you have repeat offenders, of course, it is a crime to make a hoax 999 call. And although I'm sure the police would deal with it pragmatically, depending on who the person is, clearly there is an education point as well. I do know that part of the Safer Schools and some of the schools work, our young people are informed about how to use 999 and emergency services. So, but happy to get back to you with a bit more detail.
One final question, if I may, Chair. On page 13, under Building Trust and Confidence, the retention of skilled staff. Again, really pleased to see that locally our attrition rate is as low as 7.1, which is below the average. But again, I think it'd be nice to know what the national average is, and if we are significantly low, to actually advertise that we have a really good retention rate.
Yeah, once again, I don't have the national average to hand. I'm very happy to get that for you. This is testament. People do want to work for Cambridgeshire Constabulary, and retention, the Chief Constable's retention rate is fairly good, and that is despite our officers not receiving the same sort of allowances as surrounding and collaborating forces, which is testament to the fact that people want to work in this county, in this constabulary. The other thing with retention, when we look against national average for policing, actually if you then put that against other public services, it is quite outstanding, that retention rate. When you look at local services like prison service, etc. For example, we know that policing is doing far better.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Holloway and then Councillor Badnam.
Thank you. I wanted to ask a bit about the domestic abuse work that you mentioned. So on page 12 you say helping to shape the ASV partnership strategy, and I'm glad that the Commission has been involved in that. I have some concerns in relation to the changes that are happening in that area, because the proposals coming from the County Council suggest a significant reduction in the number of IDVAs. They also suggest the splitting of the Cambridgeshire and the Peterborough services, meaning perhaps some duplication will be introduced within the management structures. Now I realise that that's partly due to a reduced funding pot. I wondered, first of all, whether you could give some clarity on the nature of the funding that's available for those services, so both coming from the government and then through your office, but also from the County Council. Secondly, particularly in relation to medium risk victims going to the Victim and Witness Hub, will all of those then be supported by Peterborough Women's Aid, and is there sufficient capacity and funding for Peterborough Women's Aid to do that. Clearly they're an excellent local organisation with the expertise that's required, so that's really good, but 150,000 is not necessarily that much when you consider the number of people they may have to deal with. Do you have numbers on the kinds of case numbers that you would expect them to be taking within a year? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. This is a really important point, and it's an area, both the IDVAs and the IDVAs, and the constabulary and the partnership response to domestic abuse and sexual violence, which I have been very close to and receive very regular updates and briefs. In answer to your question, this was an area that concerned me as well, particularly with reduced funding, and this is national reduction in funding, and perhaps some changes within the partnership as well. What was really important was provision of service, both for the high risk, which my understanding is that kind of remains unchanged with local authorities taking the lead there, but that medium risk area was one that has actually concerned me for some time as well. In our response to medium risk, we have got certainly better at it. But I think it might be useful, Councillor. It just so happens that Nikki sitting next to me leads in my team and has been very much involved in these conversations and discussions. So, Nikki, would you be able to provide a bit more detail?
Okay, so if I pick up, can you hear me okay? The mics are a bit glitchy, aren't they? I'll just move it closer. So picking up the IDVA provision first, so we understand the consultation process for the entire IDVA service is underway at the moment, and it has been driven by the decoupling actually, as well as a reduction and change in budgets that's available. But I believe the consultation's ongoing, and I think it'd probably be inappropriate for us to talk in a setting like this about the management structure, because it's a part of the council's proposals rather than ours. It's the council that responded. So I understand comments can still be made to the Cambridgeshire consultation until the 27th of March, where the Peterborough one has just ended. So the consultation document that was actually shared originally has been revised, and the landscape has changed since that went out. So, and the local authority did agree to clarify that. So the actual reduction from the PCC's office was actually only £220,000. But where that funding still exists, and some of it doesn't still exist, it's actually being reinvested in the provision of support for victims of domestic abuse. So that funding hasn't been taken away from the provision of support. Namely, it's actually being reinvested into the medium risk work you referenced in the second part of your question. So the local authority decided to refocus their energy onto supporting high risk victims, which is the provision through the IDVA services. And we took back the responsibility for putting in place a service for medium risk victims of police reported domestic abuse, which is going to be delivered by Peterborough Women's Aid, which is what you referred to. So obviously some of the money has been retained to deliver that service, and we're actually going to be investing more. And you expressed a concern about whether that was going to be enough. This is a pilot, and that's the whole point of this. It is a pilot. We don't know what the demand is going to be. But what we've done is ask Peterborough Women's Aid, who will be supporting victims across the entire county, to be based in our Victim and Witness Hub. So our Victim and Witness Hub has 18 skilled members of staff who are going to be on hand to support Peterborough Women's Aid if we need to. So in periods of peak demand, people will not need to wait, because we're going to have Victim and Witness Hub staff there as well to help. So we're going to be monitoring it really, really closely. So one of members of staff in my team is going to be working with Peterborough Women's Aid on an almost weekly basis to monitor case numbers to see whether we might need to invest more funding into this. So please be reassured we're keeping a really close eye, and it will be a county-wide service. The other thing that's really innovative about our model is we have the medium risk service delivered by our specialist providers, but they'll be linking with community-based services as well. So we've awarded funding to the Meadows, which is a very small grassroots-based charity in Cambridge, who will be accepting referrals and signposting from Peterborough Women's Aid to support people in their own communities. So that's hugely positive. We're also providing funding for One Voice for Travellers again, and also, really importantly, Cambridgeshire Deaf Association. And we work in partnership all the time with Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Partnership to ensure we're linking in with their community outreach service as well. So the whole model works together to ensure that when somebody's a victim of domestic abuse, they will be able to get the support they need. So just to give you a little bit more reassurance, with the funding that we've taken out, I've just referred a huge amount has gone into the medium risk. £65,000 we lost, unfortunately, because we had a 4.2% reduction in our core victim services grants. The money doesn't exist, so we can't port money that doesn't exist anymore. And the other amount has gone into our ISBA provision. So every single penny that's not going to the local authority has gone into services directly.
Thank you very much. Yeah, go on then, and then we'll go to Councillor Random.
Thank you very much. That's good to hear. So has there been any impact assessment done on these changes so far, or would that come after consultation? You know, and also on the point about community organisations and about the involvement of the wider community, I wondered what training is given to, for example, health and social care staff, and particularly in light of the fact that I don't know whether I should give specifics of which posts may or may, and maybe I shouldn't talk about which posts may or may not be deleted, given that that's currently in consultation, but that we'll leave it at that. What support is given to staff who may be frequently coming into contact with people who are victims of domestic abuse? So that could be in health, social care, could be in the police as well.
Yeah, I think it's quite important to differentiate. It's not our consultation. We're not the ones restructuring. It's Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council that are restructuring caused by the decoupling, not caused by this. All we've got is funding streams that we bid for with them that are coming to an end. So I think it's probably best not to reflect on the consultation, because as you quite rightly pointed out, there are posts in there that are being looked at the moment that may or may not be there in the future. With regards to the second point you made about training, yeah, there's a constant programme of professionals training that is run by the staff that work within the County Council and Peterborough City Council, and they also bring in experts to do that. So there's a whole series of training that people can access. And also what is really interesting is we take the learning from domestic homicide reviews, now called domestic abuse related death reviews in the county, to actually look at where there might be gaps in knowledge. So it's actually evidence based. It's not, they don't just pick a subject, they look at where we might need to learn more and put on sessions for staff across all different agencies. There's even community-based programmes as well. Does that answer your questions, or anything extra you'd like to ask?
And if I could just chip in from a professional point of view, training around domestic abuse is mandatory for staff in a whole variety of posts in the council, but also within schools and things like that as well. Councillor Bradnam, and then Councillor Leaming.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, and good afternoon. I've got several questions, if I may, Chair, on page 11, which is the Tackling Crime and Antisocial Behaviour page. Incidentally, thank you very much for the very clear layout of this. I think it's a big improvement. I'll start off with the ASB problem solving, and I know this involves a community safety partnership, and I have direct involvement with that in my own parish. But I just wanted to understand things like, there are a number of things I want to raise with you about what the Police and Crime Commissioner's view is, and what can be done about this sort of thing in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So the first one is antisocial driving on park and ride sites, and what is the approach that, do you feel the Chief Constable is doing enough to look at these sites with regard to antisocial driving, because it can be so disruptive to nearby residents, and also because it's extremely difficult for them to report in a timely way. It happens, you take 20 minutes to do your report online, and by which time things might be over, and very often the police do not attend unless they get a very great number of reports. So I just wanted to ask, are you holding the Chief Constable to account for their input into this? And what is your view of the county-wide approach to antisocial driving on park and ride sites?
Thank you, Councillor. As you well know, probably it's not just park and ride sites. Peterborough have had some very significant issues. East Cambridgeshire in an industrial estate there, and this is a constant nuisance. And I use that word, I know, for local residents, and I know one of them is a care home nearby as well. One of the ones in Peterborough, it really is antisocial, really very antisocial. I know that the police do regularly patrol these, but I'm going to come back. Some of the places where they have managed to deal with this problem successfully has required partnerships. For example, the park and ride, is owned by local authority, and so we all need to work together to find ways. I do recall you saying this, and I'm not being glib. Of course, the park and ride that probably concerns you most in Milton will, of course, have a very big police station built right next to it very shortly. Hopefully that will be a deterrent factor, but I can't say the same about all the others across the county. But I haven't had as many reports recently. That doesn't mean it's not happening or people are just becoming more immune to it. But I can certainly go away back to the constabulary and just get an update from them as to what's happening. But coming back to the point of the community safety partnerships, I would very much expect them to be leading in this area, particularly with the post that I have funded and any funds behind it, particularly if there are ways that we can sort of target hardening and stop this from happening in the first place. One of the problems with this type of offence, and there are often offences, but the antisocial behaviour is that you just tend to move it from one place to another. And that might be good for the residents of Milton if we move them on, but they will go somewhere else, and therefore it needs more thinking how we deal with this situation. There are often young people that are coming together. What I have seen on some of the videos shown around is some really people will get killed. We've seen some really bad instances. So it is serious, it is significant, and I would expect the community safety partnerships, the police and partnerships, to be doing all they can, where they can, to tackle it, bearing in mind all the other competing priorities. But happy to have another conversation about your local issue.
Thank you. And I think the police are increasingly using, and I can't remember the acronym for it, but it's like the place-based order that prevents people from gathering there. And I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it, but I think in those cases where an individual car is found again, the car can be impounded, and that's of course the loss to the person being a nuisance. But anyway, right, we'll keep on bringing that to your attention. Thank you. We might contact you separately about that. I think the reason you may have less reports is because it's been the winter and colder, and these events, these meets, tend to happen in the summer. Also, trivially, because the cars are very hyped up, and people don't want to get them muddy in the winter, so they like to go out in the summer when it's dry and show them off to their friends. Anyway, that's just one small thing. So the other one, which is also a local issue, is the really worrying problem on some local shared use paths where we have had an increasing frequency of people driving on them, either on motorbikes or actually in cars. We've had a number of incidents where people have been cycling or running along the Mere Way in Cambridge, just outside Cambridge, and they have been faced with cars coming in the opposite direction, driving them off the road. We've had people assaulted, and we have had thefts. And so the whole principle of an active travel route, which local businesses are trying to promote to reduce cars on the road, this is being eroded by the fear that if they travel on a particular section of that shared use active travel route, they might be accosted or apprehended or have things stolen from them. So I just would like to know whether you are comfortable with the approach that the Chief Constable is taking with regard to that, because it's extremely serious. And, you know, this could jeopardise the whole principle of people using it as an active travel route to get to work, and that's an important function.
I'm very happy to take that away and have a look and have a conversation with the Chief Constable and the local policing team. Once again, it sounds like something that the local community safety partnership should be involved in. You know, how do we stop people from driving on it? Because I'm not going to be able to problem solve that now, but we've got good people who can. So happy to take that one away, and we'll come back to you.
And there was a third one, if I may. This is about you'll be aware of the Combined Authority Voi scooter trial that's has already been running for some years in the area immediately around the city, and whilst it's extremely useful to have electric scooters and electric bikes for journeys that are actually quite inconvenient or time-consuming to take on foot, it actually makes them much more manageable on one of these electric scooters or bikes. But you will appreciate many of these are being used improperly on pavements when they should be on the road. They're silent, there's a risk to pedestrians. And so, do you know if there's anything happening about legislation to make it easier to control what happens when people are in charge of an e-scooter or an e-bike?
So, obviously this is an ongoing issue, both locally, regionally and nationally. Coming back to the use in Cambridge, the whole point of that was as a pilot to then look at what legislation should or could be required. But the last time I had an update on this is that this was still not complete. The work from the pilots across the country was not complete, and therefore I'm not sure we're much further forward, and I'm not sure how much of a priority this will be with government at the moment, but I do absolutely recognise it is a significant local issue. And there are a couple of things for me that are of particular issue. You mentioned there, because I have visited the Cambridge Deaf Association. I mean, there is a particular impact on people with certain disabilities. And of course, we all know that actually when using most of these types of e-scooters, e-bikes, then road traffic laws should be in place, i.e. driving licence and insurance, no drinking, etc., etc. Which, you know, there is some form of current legislation. However, the legislation was made for motor cars on roads, and it's just not helping or assisting the police. Once again, I think if we put all the enforcement onto policing, you know, I suspect they could use all their resources and all their time to do this, and none of us would want them to do that necessarily. The reality is this: you can still go to any high street retailer, well, not any, but some high street retailer, and buy one of these and go and ride around the roads of Cambridge or Waterbeach or Peterborough or wherever. And I think that's the bit that needs, you know, some kind of thinking about how we legislate moving forward. But I will chase up, actually. It was a DFT, it was Department for Transport, and I will chase up just to see where we are in relation to the evaluation of pilots and any legislation that's in the pipeline.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I'm really encouraged to hear you say and to remind us that the Voi was a trial to see what we needed to improve in terms of legislation. So bear in mind that Voi are currently in the process of expanding that trial area. So, you know, even though we haven't got the results of the initial trial, they are nevertheless expanding into bigger geographical areas, some of which make perfect sense, Marley and up towards Waterbeach, and also into places like Cottenham and Impington, which, you know, would welcome them in many ways. But I would really like to know what the timescale is for the review of whether any further legislation is or improvements in the legislation are necessary. Can you, do you have an indication of when the original review was supposed to be done?
I will take that away, but years ago. I suspect, and I will give a personal view, and this is a personal view. I think I completely understand Cambridge in particular, why that would be used as a pilot. I think that people find it rather confusing, though, that I can use that one, but I can't use my own one, and I don't think it's helpful. I think it does need evaluation. We do need new guidance. We need legislation, and we need to, and then an education piece as well, because actually the point is, quite often it's young people on them, and they can be really dangerous, you know, and people are getting hurt. You know, people have lost their lives, and that's dreadful. So yeah, we do need to be doing something. I will look into this, and I will come back to you, Councillor.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Thank you. Councillor Leaming.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner. And I'd also like to thank Nikki for the response that she sent to me earlier. However, I think things have moved on since you last sent that with this consultation. So I wanted to just follow up on a few things that Councillor Holloway raised. There were looking at the whole provision of domestic abuse services in the sort of wider sense. There are many pieces involved, and things are changing within those pieces, particularly given that there is a trial. I wondered, who is the body that takes responsibility for overall coordination of these various services? So you mentioned that there may be community-based services involved. Who oversees them? Who's responsible for their their standards and coordinating who is sent where, and yes, obviously their training, but how they fit into the wider picture. Also, there's the role of impact, which I'm not sure whether that's changing. You mentioned impact in the response that you sent to me, but I don't know whether that is changed within the potential the outcomes of this consultation. Perhaps I'll stop there. There's a bit more that I'd like to ask, but the first thing is who is coordinating all of these things? What is the role of impact? Who's overviewing the community-based services, please?
Thank you for your question, Chair. I'll hand over to Nikki in a moment so she can give a more tactical and foreign strategic. There are a number, and you'll be aware, across both Cambridgeshire and Peterborough of some of the structures. So, for example, I chair the High Harms Board, which brings together, it's a very strategic meeting, but it brings together those all those parties. And one of the themes there is certainly violence against women and girls and serious violence. So domestic abuse is raised there. So if there are significant and serious strategic issues, that is the place. But I know that there is a realm of other and more tactical bodies. So Nikki, are you able to give a bit more detail?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll take each bit in turn, and if I miss something, just pick it up. So the High Harms Board obviously is the highest level strategic board, and then the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Strategic Board is where all the commissioners and also the providers come together to discuss this. But you asked a question about how we coordinate it all. Well, the people who hold the budgets that commission services, such as the Police and Office, the Police and Crime Commissioner and the local authority, obviously keep an overview of all the services they personally commission. So you were talking about who checks that they're adhering to standards, legislation. So any services that the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner commission, as in we either grant fund, bear in mind the phrase commissioning uses a mixed model of the way we get funding, so it might be grant fund, it might be a tender process. What we do is we work with the providers and we carry out a whole range of due diligence, making sure they have the right safeguarding policies in place, that their staff have been trained, etc. So we do go through a whole process. But in terms of how we work with, and the local authority will do that as well, but we work in partnership with our local authority colleagues who commission services. So that's through the DASB board that I mentioned, but also interestingly that will be through the new Victim and Prisoners Act legislation, which puts a duty on the local authority on health and also on police and crime commissioners to come together to commission victim support services for victims of domestic abuse, sexual violence and serious violence. So we've already started, even though the statutory guidance is not out, we've already started in like an embryonic form of having those meetings. So we've got that structure in place already, and then that obviously feeds up to the High Harms Board. So there's quite a lot of oversight. But even though we commission services, there are still services in the community that offer support which they're not funded by us, and they just come together as part of the model. They get funding potentially from the lottery. There's also funding their own fundraising as well. So it's sort of a bit of a jigsaw of services. Does that answer that part of the question?
It does, but it also makes me think that if there's a trial going on and something has changed, there's a chance that things could become unclear about who's doing what and who's involved with various pieces. So I'm just wondering whether there will be somebody who communicates these new structures out to all involved parties, so that everybody knows who is who's responsible for what, and not just purely within the domestic abuse and violence services, but for example in district councils, I know that, for instance, our housing team are very focused on this, and they need to understand which bit goes where whilst this trial is happening. I also wanted to ask, in the plan you've mentioned stalking, in the sort of policy around stalking. Does that fit in the umbrella of this domestic abuse and violence sort of overview within your strategy? And are the roles that you have in place on stalking, are they coordinated within the domestic abuse and violence sort of overview?
Yeah. Can I just do that in two parts? So the trial that you're referring to, the pilot, about medium risk, so that is only police reported. So that's where somebody's reported domestic abuse to the police, and it comes through that pathway. So any other domestic abuse goes into the community services, which, as you referred to, is it's currently delivered by Impact, and that's commissioned by the local authority. So the pilot, there has been lots and lots of work, because the pilot model's been co-designed by a number of different partners, and we have got flowcharts everywhere which show how people come in different ways. They've been shared with lots of different providers, and through the governance, so beneath the domestic abuse and sexual violence steering group, there's a group called Borg Ops, so that's where all the providers that come together, and we've shared that with them. So I just want to reassure you that we've done everything we possibly can to ensure anybody who would be involved in our services knows exactly how you can access services, and if that isn't the right service for them, where they would be directed. And we would never leave somebody without, we wouldn't just point them to somewhere, we'd actually warm hand over. The Victim and Witness Hub can help people access services. So that's that point. You reference housing. I think there is some posts in local housing that do link in with our domestic abuse services. They are called housing IDVAs, and they're part of, I believe, the consultation that's currently ongoing with Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Council. But as they will all come still under the umbrella of the two domestic abuse and sexual violence partnerships, they will be part of the wider team, so they should be aware through staff briefings of how victims can access services. I think that's all those. Then we did stalking. So it was you were just trying to ascertain that stalking was part of the wider model. It is very slightly different. So we have two posts that were previously IDVAs. They're now called ISACs. That's the national best practice that's come from the Susie Lamplugh Trust Super complaint to say that they should be called ISACs. Very slightly different way of working. We've been quite lucky because Cambridgeshire County Council's agreed to host both of the ISACs, who are very, very experienced IDVAs, just changing in name, and actually are going to work across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. So we will have a single referral pathway into our expert stalking advisors, but we'll be working again with our Victim and Witness Hub to try and spread that learning and to provide more resilience as well. So, and I think just one final reassurance that any victim of crime living in any of your areas, all they need to do is ring our Victim and Witness Hub, and the staff in there will direct them to where they can get support. We do appreciate sometimes this landscape can be confusing. And then one final point, you reference Impact. quite a number of times, Impact is a commission service, so that's not funded by us. So that is your community outreach for domestic abuse, and it's actually funded by the local authorities. And the tenders are out at the moment, I believe, so that means there's tenders out for providers to bid in to deliver that service in the future. But that is solely funded and solely contract managed by the local authorities. And it must be confusing, I do appreciate that. So key message for victims: they need support, they're not quite sure where to go. Go to the Victim Witness Hub. They are there Saturdays even as well. Just ring the free phone number, they will direct you, they can support you, they'll help you to where you need to go.
Thank you. That's actually very helpful, even though it's quite complicated. But yes, and thank you for sort of affirming what victims should do for clarity. That's very helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that very comprehensive report, Nikki. Response, Nikki. Councillor Sharp, I think, had a question.
Thank you, Chair. One of my questions has been answered because I was going to ask about stalking, which Councillor Lean's just... So it's very... because it must be absolutely frightening for the individuals involved, what's happening there. And obviously we're seeing, shall we say, I don't know what the right phrase is, more high-profile people getting stalked, but that's probably the tip of the iceberg compared to, shall we say, the ordinary residents who, you know, especially those involved in domestic violence, where former partners are stalking, that sort of thing. So, you know, I'm happy. I look forward to seeing as a robust figures we can get on that. Just two other points, just very quickly, and I think my colleague up here mentioned it on page 9, the more visible policing hours. Welcome that. I just wonder, are we seeing an actual reduction in some of these because of the, or is it maybe too early to say yet, reduction in some of these incidents because of obviously the extra amount of resource we're able to put into it? And I'll go on to my second point as well. Then it's just again agreeing with Councillor Bradnam about, because I've asked this question many times around e-scooters and the danger to pedestrians and elderly people. So, and I've said it before, it's not just government need to do some legislation, and I've criticised the previous government as well as obviously we need the new one to get on with it. And I understand they've got other issues, but it's bizarre that you can only use the hire scooter, but you can't use one that you bought off Amazon, and I'm sure other retailers are available. But it's just a crazy situation, really. But anyway, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. I think, as you pointed out, Councillor, most of those have been dealt with in other questions. The antisocial behaviour and the increased hours, a lot of that was enabled by the £1 million government fund that the Constabulary partners received. As I mentioned earlier, we are currently putting in another bid for an additional 1 million. But of course this should be part of and is part of core policing as well. We have seen this government make the local neighbourhood policing pledge. We're working through the plans at the moment. Although this isn't significantly increased numbers, everything is welcome, and that will see over time an increase, particularly in our local policing teams. I will go away and look. So last year, when this was going on, we do know that reports of antisocial behaviour were down, and from the top of my head, because I was given this figure, it was like over 20%. But really, you know, I'm not going to dwell on that too much, because that's reported to the police, antisocial behaviour. Is it actually reducing antisocial behaviour? I think that's the question we need to ask in the analysis that needs to be done. I think what's really useful, not necessarily mentioned there, we talk about additional patrol hours and visible policing. Part of that funding was used to get some outreach youth services, and they were actually going out with the police, and it works. You know, there's a thing. Not just telling the kids to op it and stop being antisocial, actually putting some service in and trying to get to the root causes, which is what I'm really keen to do as well. So I think, you know, the antenatal evidence was, yes, certainly we know that hotspot intelligence-led policing model works. It works up and down the country, and that was used specifically here. And of course, we will be looking to do the same thing with that additional funding and as everyday business moving forward.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from panel members? No? Thank you. Okay, so members will note the recommendations from the OPCC is set out at the start of the paper to request to review, scrutinise, support and then to share progress in our relevant kind of day jobs and communities. Our members agreed that actually we've done that. Sorry, was that an agree or a question? No.
Question.
Agreed.
Chair, can we make a recommendation or an action? I'm not sure which it is. It's referenced my previous questions around national figures. Could we, I don't know if it needs to be an action or a recommendation, that in future reports, those national average figures are actually put in, so we as a panel can better scrutinise your stated figures?
We can request that. Thank you.
Yeah, so very happy to do that. If we're putting it against national, we'll put that in.
Thank you very much. Okay, we will move on then to the next agenda item, which is the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Police and Crime Plan. This is the thematic pillar deep dive around safe communities. Commissioner, would you like to present the paper?
Thank you, Chair. And I won't spend too long here, not least of which you've had the paper, but I think a lot of what we're talking about we've actually already gone through in the last agenda item. So I'm pleased to be able to bring this, and this is the first of the series of the thematic deep dives, which will be reporting on the priorities within both the new and previous police and crime plan to deliver what is the overriding priority for us all, and that's our safer communities. Just a couple of areas that I want to pick up. Police officer visibility. It won't be lost on colleagues around the room. I suspect you do a lot of knocking on doors and speaking to local communities and receive lots of correspondence. We never see the police is often the one that's levelled at us as well. We do now have more police officers in this county than we've ever had. The standard figure we use is 1,732, but at any one time we've actually got more than that. As I mentioned earlier, that there was more recruitment going on over the next couple of years in relation to the government local guarantee pledge. As it happens, the constabulary aren't having to work too hard at that. They've already got the pool of officers, and they're just going to expand the courses. So, you know, I'm absolutely convinced, unlike perhaps some other big, large forces, we will be able to meet all those targets. And I've also talked about the £1 million of hotspot funding and that commitment by the Chief Constable and myself to local visible presence, which is important, that local policing. But I will say this, and you know, particularly in an open forum as well, we talk about police officer visibility. I understand that. I understand that's about confidence as well, trust and confidence. People want to see the police. My main priority there is keeping people safe, and I know that's the Chief Constable's priority as well. And that is often not about police officers walking up and down the high street. This is about the work of all the fantastic police officers and staff in all those roles within the policing that we need to support, who on a daily basis, their mission is to keep us safe. Call handling is the next item. I mean, I am pleased that this has improved. It's taken too long, frankly. When it comes to holding the Chief Constable account, this is one area that I have been consistent, and I know as a panel you have been as well. We are seeing some significant improvements. We're also seeing a new telephony system being introduced soon as well. So it's good to see those call times, the call drop-offs as well. I am assured if anyone actually rings 101 and then drops off, you will get a call back from the police. Every single one of those will get a call back from the police. So that is moving in the right direction. Public confidence, listening to concerns of local people and holding to account. I continue to do this both formally through our business coordination meetings with the Chief Constable, with ad hoc conversations I have with the Chief Constable, with one-to-ones with the Chief Constable, and as a recent abhorrent incident across our great county when we were basically invaded by criminals hell-bent on particularly causing problems with our rural communities. I indeed asked our Chief Constable directly to go and speak to local residents, which he was happy, well actually happy is not the word, but which he did, and we did hold a big public meeting. So those are some of the areas around public confidence and listening to concerns. Fairer funding for Cambridgeshire Constabulary, the fight goes on, and I thank the panel, and I thank the County Council, and I thank our MPs. Can I see this being resolved? Well, I mean, I talk to the policing minister, I say MP, I speak to anybody who will listen to me, and I write to anybody who listens to me. I am concerned that this will not be a priority for government with all the other competing priorities, but we will continue to make our voice heard. I saw recently, because the figures were shown with the fourth worst funded, I think it's now gone up to third worst, and actually if they use the real data, which is half the problem, i.e. we have far more people, over 10% more people in our county than what the policing formula is based on, then I suspect we'll be right at the bottom there with my good friend and colleagues from Lincolnshire. So moving on, enabling communities to help resolve local issues. I've talked about our community safety partnerships. This is probably one of the areas I'm most proud about. It's really good work by our CSPs, and they are seen nationally as doing some really good work as well. And this is exactly what it says in the tin, local problem solving, and there's lots of really good examples across all of our district and city council areas where that has worked, and this is an area I like to focus on. And continued engagement and communications, continuing to visit anybody who wants to see me really, and even those that don't, particularly in our schools, but I do my very best to engage both with those harder to reach communities, like Speak Out in the Cambridge Ethnic Community Forum, and I have made it my mission to visit as many schools as possible, going back to the early intervention and prevention piece. That's the one point of contact, although actually telling our young people what my responsibilities are about effective and efficient policing and holding the chief to account and managing budgets is probably not what they want to hear, so we could do get into some very interesting conversations about other things that they are interested in, so really helpful. So I think I will leave it there, and is there any questions, Chair?
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Do we have any questions? Councillor Bradnam and then Councillor Leaming.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions, and it's around the digital area. So we're talking about keeping people safe. It's not about being seen these days walking on a high street. It's about, and you didn't say it, but my understanding is we need a very high calibre of officers who can interrogate digital data cleverly and with intuition to understand what is going on behind closed doors, as it were. So two things. One is, are you getting a sufficient quality of recruits, and are you taking on apprenticeships to engage people and to train them exactly as you need them to be? That's one thing. And the second thing is, to what degree are you being able to support young people who are feeling bullied online, and what is being done to support youngsters in that way? Sorry, that's a bit of a vague question, but you might want to give a broad answer. Thank you.
In terms of the first question, I mean, there's lots I could talk about in relation to the policing response to what is the cyber world. And when we look at cyber, really important to understand what we're talking about. There are two types of crime. There's that cyber-enabled crime and cyber-dependent crime. And the reason I say that, the cyber-enabled crime is just crime that's always been crime, that people now use computers to commit, for example, fraud, and to some extent child abuse and things like that. And then the cyber-dependent, which is probably the more technical, the sort of stuff we hear where those attacks on services and things like that. So you talked about specifically here what we're doing around recruitment, etc. Well, actually, when it comes to police recruitment, the standards are higher than they've ever been. I personally question sometimes they might be too high, and actually disbarring some people who might be very good police officers. But the standards are high, including we actually run apprenticeship police officer schemes here in Cambridgeshire. And with that comes all the upside of the positive skills and the training, but the downside of that is that we're losing a lot of time because they're spending time studying and what's going to happen when they've got their degree, whether they stay in policing, etc. But something I support. It's an operational decision, and that's not the only pathway in. There is another pathway into policing, which is a direct detective pathway. That seems to be working well as well. But when it comes to some of these really technical skills that are required in cyber, you've got to question, is it police officers at all that you want doing that? And that's why we need to be working with private industry, etc. And that does happen. The UK response, both nationally and regionally, to that high end, I know is one of the best in the world. It's that local, which we have invested in, and Chief Constable has, and you may recall one time when I come to you asking for a precept rise, there was further investment into cyber prevent, and that's local, experienced, skilled police officers here in Cambridgeshire who deal with that. So I could go on and on, but once again, there's always that risk if you're looking at specific skill sets of police officers. Actually, the role of police officer is generic at point of entry, but recognising that you do need a completely different skill set to you did 30 years ago in some areas, particularly when tackling the online world. And then you mentioned about people being bullied in school. There is that Safer Schools programme. I know that the schools, I'm a school governor myself, I know that others around the room will be, and I know that there are certainly within schools information being given as to what young people can do. Also, when we talk about what are the police doing and what are schools doing, what are others doing, I will always take any platform that anyone will give me to say, yeah, but hold on, what are the service providers, the people making all of the money, the social media accounts, what are they doing? Because they have the technology, they have the finances, all at their disposal to make this world a much better place, to be honest with you. And it seems to be an uphill battle quite often to get them to put that resource into ensuring that people using their services are safe online, and that's something I will continue to shout about nationally as well. That's not to say that there isn't some good practice, and I know some providers will engage, but unfortunately all too often they don't. And this isn't rocket science anymore. There is software, there's algorithms, there's stuff that they can be doing to keep our young people more safe online, and I think we should all be shouting loud from the rooftops when we see that's not happening.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think Councillor Leeming, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, I have one question and one comment. The question was to do with the hotspot funding. Is that going to continue into the next financial year, do you know?
Hopefully, yes. The bid is in now. It's got to be approved by the Home Office. I'm confident because we've got good people who have put in a good bid. So hopefully any day we'll hear back. And it'll be the same, it'll be another £1 million. But that's not the only money spent on antisocial behaviour policing and neighbourhood policing, but it's just additional money that we can use.
Thank you. And my second thing is actually a comment on community safety. So recently I've seen that your digital communications team have been posting things out about not just making arrests, about things that the police does to keep the community safe. And there's two things that have come up fairly recently, both of which have been really well received. There was one which was a comment on the Pegasus scheme, and another was the Herbert Protocol. Both of those two things, communities have really well received. So the Pegasus scheme is if a vulnerable person with a disability or an illness breaks down, and the police has got information about that person that they can rapidly access and help that person in their distress. And the Herbert Protocol is looking after people with dementia. And I know both of those two pieces of communication were really well received by the public. So if there are other things like that the police, perhaps amongst the police, this is you know you're doing this stuff, but the community doesn't necessarily always know that that's going on in the background. So please put more of those sorts of messages out because they're really welcome. Thank you.
Chair, thanks for that feedback. I'd like to take all the credit. I mean, the Force Communications team is doing that, but I will take some of the credit here as well. I mean, there's good people working there, but traditionally, many years ago, the police communications was a mugshot of a villain, locked up for drugs and how long. And yes, you know, that's information that, you know, a lot of us want to know that the police are doing their job. But I think we have seen a slight move away from that as well. We're getting more local stories, and you know, our local policing teams are able to post on social media as well. With that comes a risk. Every now and then they post something, but perhaps, you know, we in hindsight, but I'm afraid that's the world that we live in now. They are trained, but you know, I prefer, at least I prefer the idea that there's that more engagement and more information being put out, rather than just updating people on what criminal and what villain's been locked up in prison recently. So I'll take that back to the Force Communications team, and thank you for your feedback.
Thank you. I think particularly these two things have offered reassurance to people that, you know, it's a different sort of community safety to know that the police are doing these sorts of things in the background, and it's good to remind people. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Boyce.
Thank you, Chair. I have two questions, if you'll indulge. The first one's under item 5.7. It's around local crime and disorder. And this is a local issue. Peterborough City Council's now becoming plagued with begging. And we have the outreach workers from Peterborough City Council go out to those people, many of which don't want to engage with the outreach workers. 2 to 3 years ago, the police would actually then move them on. Just 2 points to that. Is the police still able to move them on? If so, can we see if that can happen? But also, I do get concerned about the exploitation of those people who are begging, especially around modern slavery, because we know for a fact that some of them don't need to be doing that. They're picked up in a car in the evenings and taken away, and they're brought in the mornings by somebody in a car. So that's the first question.
Thank you. I remember being here and elsewhere, particularly in Peterborough 2 or 3 years ago, and being asked the same question: what are the police doing about this? In fact, 3 years ago as well. So look, there's been an awful lot of work, and you'll know from Peterborough City Council as well, both from the council and from policing. I mean, there's that dedicated police officer in the city centre, on top of the city centre team as well. You're right to point out root causes. We know that there's a lot going on there as well in relation to root causes. But, you know, having spoken to lots of people on this particular subject in Peterborough, you know, it is a thorny, wicked issue. I mean, you know, I'm told that actually there is accommodation available in most cases, but you know, for one reason or another, the individuals are not selecting to take that up. What I would expect, and I suppose the answer to your question, is that where people are committing crime, or they are committing breaches of the police, then the police should deal with that accordingly. We're all compassionate and we want to deal with, you know, the underlying root causes, but the police should be dealing with that accordingly. I know that has happened. I know there is frustration as well when they see that doesn't happen. It's obviously an operational matter, but I know that there is partnership working going on in Peterborough. I'm not sure it's different now from 2 or 3 years ago from the evidence, but I will certainly take away and go back to the constabulary, the local policing team, just to get an update on where we are with that.
Thank you, Chair. The second question is quite an easy question, I hope, Commissioner. Under listening to the views of people who live in the rural and work in the rural communities, your report lists you've been to speak to the NFU and also Countryside Watch. From those meetings, was there any outcomes, and is there any follow-up work taking place?
So, Countryside Watch is a charity which I actually fund across the county. They have got a work plan. A lot of their work now is around prevention and coordination. The NFU actually called their own NFU meeting. I think the biggest outcome, if we get to the significant issue, and particularly, although I've spent a lot of time visiting our rural communities over the years, those recent visits were as a direct result of activities that occurred in January of this year, out of which there are a number of actions, particularly for the constabulary. I mean, I could you haven't asked a specific question here, but there is a fairly clear plan by the constabulary. Following that, there's already been 20 arrests in relation to that. And for any that don't know, this was in January. There was a significant event here across the eastern region of England, actually, when criminals caused havoc in our rural communities. There's been a coordinated multi-force investigation. Over 20 people arrested so far. Importantly, the Crown Prosecution Service are involved as well early on. So out of those meetings, a lot of plans. I think probably the biggest one is taking the Chief Constable. And one of the questions is, well, you know, what if this happens again? The constabulary have and are learning lessons on the day. Now, if I was going to be defensive at all, and it's not my job to be defensive, I think whatever plan they had in place, I think would have been difficult to tackle that, given that the severe level of and the nature of the crime. But lessons have certainly been learnt. I am assured by the Chief Constable there'll be a very different reaction from policing if this was to happen again, and the police and others are determined to bring anybody involved in criminality on that day to justice, and have put resources into doing just that. Just a couple of things. You talked about rural communities and action plans and actions moving forward. I actually also attend and sit on the National Rural Crime Network and do invest in that as well. So there's some work strands going on there, which I've spoken to members of Parliament, because there is legislation going through at the moment, but seems to get stuck. And this is around, call it tool marking and machinery marking. And once again, when it comes to learning all things rural, you know, things like the sat-navs being stolen off of the tractors, a massive issue. That these cost £10,000 a go. You would have thought the manufacturers would make them so they're kind of worthless, but they don't. And the same with a lot of farm machinery and construction, which often is a part of organised criminality. And there's legislation out there about manufacturers having to mark them properly, because the police often do find container loads worth of this stuff at the docks, but can't find who it actually belongs to. So that's some of those strategic actions are held by the National Rural Crime Network locally, and particularly in relation to local events. Awful lot of work, a lot of lessons learned, and a lot of ongoing actions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further questions? No? Thank you. Okay, so members have received the recommendations within the paper to review, scrutinise, support the work and share the progress within the communities that we represent. Members agreed that we've done that. Thank you. Thank you very much. Commissioner, we're now moving into the kind of panel-specific agenda. You're free to go, but you're also free to stay should you wish to. Oh, no, clearly the meter's run out. But if you would like to go, that's perfectly acceptable. Thank you very much for your contribution and for your team as well. Thank you. Sorry? Sorry. Oh, I see. Does anybody need a quick comfort break? Yes? Yes. Okay. 5 minutes then and we'll come back. Item number 3, that's appointment of an independent panel member. You have had the paper. There is one slight amendment I will explain since the papers were circulated. So panel members may know it's best practice that police and crime panels appoint a minimum of 2 independent persons to assist the elected panel in its functions. Since the other independent member left, and I've lost track of how long ago that was, I'm going to say 12 months, we have had 2 attempts to recruit. We haven't just been ignoring that. We've made 2 previous attempts to recruit, both of which were unsuccessful. So today's paper is about having a 3rd attempt. And the report that you've had before you is asking members to agree an interview panel of 3 members, including myself, who will need to be available on April the 17th. You'll have seen that the timelines are quite tight. The times and locations for interviews will be confirmed. As the paper shows, members were initially asked to agree to delegate the authority of appointing the successful candidate, should one be found, to the interview panel. The reason for this was to allow the independent member the opportunity to train alongside the panel members at the beginning of the municipal year and attend our first meeting in July. Since the paper was circulated, we've received the requested further advice from the Home Office, which is that the decision of the interview panel will be brought back to the July meeting for ratification for the full panel. So what we're looking for this afternoon are 2 or 3 volunteers for an interview panel on the 17th. And obviously, if there are any questions arising from the paperwork that you've been given. Okay, Councillor Boyce.
I'm happy to volunteer.
Thank you very much. Paper duly noted. Councillor Bradnam.
Before we go into I'm prepared to be considered for that panel, but I just wanted to raise some issues about the paperwork that we received.
Yes.
Are you happy that I've raised that now?
Yes.
Okay, so on page 25 of our agenda pack, find it, here we are, towards the bottom of the page, it's the 3rd paragraph up from the bottom. It says the closing date for applications is Friday the 2nd of September 2016.
Okay.
Which obviously needs to be updated.
That was the last interview date, I think, around where I was appointed.
Yes, exactly. And then skipping forward to page 44, and I'll tell you where on page 46, but under item 3.1, when it talks about the Chief Constable, it says the Chief Constable is responsible for maintaining the Queen's peace, and I think that's probably the King's peace.
Absolutely, it is now.
And similarly on page 46, under 5.1, the Home Secretary is charged with ensuring maintenance of the Queen's peace, which should be King's peace. So
we absolutely will make those amendments.
Observations on the paperwork.
Lots of us have scrutinised it.
Okay, so but yes, if I'm prepared to be considered for that post. Just one thing.
You mean for the interview panel?
Yes, yes, exactly. But I just, with absolute respect to yourself, Chair, is it appropriate, I will just ask this, you can throw me out if you want to, is it appropriate that you sit on that panel as an independent member as well? Is that a precedent? I don't know, I'm just asking, and I'm not objecting, I'm just asking.
I can only reflect back on my own experience, at which point the chair of the interview panel was the chair of the panel yeah, and also an independent member. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Just going to clarify, I was on the panel when you.
I believe you were,
and
sir.
Edward were
yes.
appointed going
yes.
back. That I think I just joined it, and it was. I think it was Ben. Was it? It was either Jason Ablewhite. Well, I think it was before him. I think it was Ben.
No, Jason was commissioner when I started. Yeah. And Ray was on the panel. You were on the panel, and I just can't remember his name.
I think it was Ben.
Yes,
Ben
yes,
Shelton
yes,
from
yes.
South Cambs was the chairman of that panel.
Yes.
That was just when I joined it. Yeah. So that's the precedent: is that the chair of the panel is the chairman of the interview. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we have 2 potential volunteers then for an interview panel on the 17th of April. We will make those amendments today, and I think the advert is going to go live tomorrow, subject obviously to approval from this panel this afternoon. So you're happy that we do that, and we'll keep our fingers crossed this time. That we actually have some applicants. All right, lovely. Thank you very much.
How long is the open period for applications?
It's going to be roughly a week, 10 days. About 10 working days.
Right, Joe, just a quick question. Where's this going to be advertised?
That's a good question.
It's going to be advertised on Indeed and then published through Facebook, and also the OPCC will publicise it as well.
And they go on the council pages, I think, don't they? Yes, through the councils as well. Yeah. So if you know anybody who might be interested. Okay, any other questions? No, obviously we'll keep members up to date as things progress, but we will make the changes. Advert will go live tomorrow, and then at the point we get the closing date, the 2 members that have volunteered for the panel will do the shortlisting. I think probably we could do that virtually, can't we? We could do the shortlisting virtually, and then we'll agree the details in terms of times and places. Probably Peterborough, if we can acquire suitable accommodation. We'll keep people posted. Okay, thank you. Okay, so agenda item 4 then, forward plan. Thank you, Heather, for staying. I know your Jack's kind of advising here this afternoon as he's not with us. So what we usually do is just have a look at the items that are coming up over the next 3 to 6 months. We've got quite a gap now between now and our next meeting in July, obviously to allow for local elections, etc. And I think we have a work plan established, I think, right round till, let me just get it up on the screen.
It stops at 17th of March. The work plan doesn't carry on. I mean, you can use the pattern of the old one, because
yes,
it's the same every year. But
yes. Well, some of the things are fixed, like the updates on the police and crime plan have to be slotted in, and obviously the precept and the budget work needs to be done at the right times in order for people to be able to have the appropriate knowledge and information before decisions are required. So I don't know if members had any particular issues or, pillars of the plan that they wanted more information on or a deep dive. No? If you think of anything, you could always just let Pippa know and say, oh, this is something I'm interested in. Could we have a look at this, please? Particularly if it, like today, having had an update on the delivery plan, if there's one of those pillars that you'd like more information on to do explore today, like we've done with the Safe Communities, that would fit quite nicely into the work plan. Okay? So if there is anything, if you can either email me, or probably more effective and efficient to email Pippa, and then you could collate those and we can share them with the PCC office. Yes, Councillor Boyce.
Going back to the interview, assuming that in the July meeting somebody comes forward and they're selected, and I knew this because I used to be an independent custody visitor, police and crime commissioner. Then it goes all the way to September. Would there be somewhere in between those dates where some training could be given on what we do?
Yes, absolutely.
To that person, because otherwise they tend to lose interest. And,
yes, absolutely.
So they don't start turning up. It seems a long while between meetings for those who are new.
Yeah.
To actually get an understanding of what we do.
Yes, we are. Am I allowed to say what I'm thinking or not? Really? Well, when I can only reflect on my own experience, and what I did was I went through interview panel, and then I attended the November meeting, sat at the back, didn't participate, sat at the back to kind of get a feel for how things operated. And at the point the full panel had ratified the decision, then kind of had a seat at the table. So the reason that we're trying to do this within this timeline is if we are successful and the interview panel have an appropriate person, that person may be able, subject to appropriate advice, obviously, may be able to actually physically attend that meeting, certainly as an observer, even if we're not in a position for them to attend. But we do have some training provision in the background, and certainly we've used frontline consulting, stuff like that. But certainly I would meet with them prior to that, and we would do some stuff, absolutely. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry,
Councillor
did you say a November meeting? Because
No, I was describing my own experience.
So what I was asking was, if we're talking about any proposed recruitment being ratified at the July meeting,
yes,
then hopefully that person could attend the September meeting.
We're hopeful that they would be able to attend the July meeting as an observer, initially,
okay.
until the full panel has ratified that decision, and then they would be able to participate. The November, I was reflecting on my experience.
Yeah.
I was appointed in September, but actually attended the November meeting. Okay, anybody, any other questions about that process, that paper? No? In which case, thank you all very much for your time and effort and energy today, and prior to today reading the papers. And we will see you all in July when it will be lovely and warm.
Are we going to be back here in July?
Can we say we're kind of